I've seen so many good community ideas like not get off the ground because they think, well, first I need to like become an influencer. That's exactly what I say and to my clients and to my community members. I'm like, start a list of at least 40 people that you know. And it really, if you can just start there, the rest will naturally unfold. My recommendation is you start with one communal experience. So even if that's just your course or just an event. I'm not like an actual community strategist without my own matrix. So I've arrived. It's taken me years, but I've finally arrived. Make no mistake. Your members are staying because the connection is really sticky and because they find a lot of value with the other members. There's a million ways to design a very bad referral program, but there's very fewer ways to do it well. So I'll start with what not to do.
You're so packed with frameworks that I can really understand why clients love working with you.
One of the tactics she employed was if I can get them talking at least to me and get them to trust me in the DMs, I can slowly draw that conversation back into the public spaces. In their intros channel in Slack, they say intros and networking. Normally just see like introductions or intros. And I love that they added networking because it cued to me, oh, this isn't just like a one and done space. I love that. That is like, that just totally validated. Oh my God, I love that you like brought in those examples. That was perfect.
Welcome to Beginner Maps, where we interview operators of top community businesses so that you can replicate the best of what these community builders have already figured out. Today, I am thrilled to have Bri Leever with us for the second time. Bri is the founder of Ember Consulting, where she helps companies and creators launch profitable communities. In our first interview, she shared her incredible story of starting this consultancy. And I've shared this interview with countless number of people who have asked me how to get into consulting themselves. So if you're one of them, check out the link in the show notes and it will take you to the first interview that we did. Now, this time, though, I've invited her to share her magic sauce that helps her build awesome communities for her clients. Welcome to the show, Bri.
Thank you, Nityesh. I'm so glad to be here.
It's great to have you here, Bri. Bri mentions in this interview how connections with other members is what makes a community sticky. Because in a world with endless content, often AI generated, authentic connections with people who get it is huge. It might just be what your people need to get the outcomes they're looking for. We've created the tool to help you foster such connections on autopilot. Using curated connections, you can create matching programs that match members based on complementary skills, goals, and backgrounds. You can also use it to host a member directory that is designed to foster connections. The best part is it all works over email, so you can use it no matter which platform your community is on. Some of the top communities like Journalist World, Limited Supply, and Rails Foundation are already using it. So check it out at curatedconnections.io or go to the link in the show notes below. Now back to the show. So let's start by talking about your community, which you recently launched. Tell us, what is it about and who's it for?
Yeah, thank you. So the first cohort launched back in the spring, and it was fabulous. It was we had about 13 members in the first cohort. And the way I structured the first cohort was for us to progress through a 7-week journey of live sessions to build the foundation for a community-powered business. And when I say community-powered, I kind of have 2 stipulations for what that does. And the first is that it's profitable, it pays you. And the second is that it's purposeful, meaning that you like running it and you're not going to get burnt out in the process. So we journeyed together and had an amazing experience. And I learned a lot through that. Really everything I do is always a test. It's always an experiment. So that first cohort of brave individuals who joined me for that kickoff, I really love that cohort-based model and what I call like my community and that experience, I would say landed in this category that we'll talk about called transformative communities. And that's really, for myself, I consider myself a little bit more of a teacher or a guide than a like super strong, like super connector. I'm sure you have people who interview here who like fall on either side of the spectrum. So I learned that I kind of confirmed that for myself and realized like my skills really lie in facilitating that like container of a process and a journey. So I'm really excited. I'm tweaking it a little bit and making some improvements. And then cohort 2 will launch in the fall. But I love the spirit of what we had, and some of the results that we're seeing as people launch their communities is fabulous and so meaningful to me as a community builder.
Love this. Now, one of the things that really struck me, even the first time when they got on this, like the first interview, was the sheer number of things that you're doing, from consulting, the number of consulting clients, to the things that you're doing for content creation, to marketing, and all of the other things. So, and now you've added this cohort to the mix. Did you take a pause with your consulting clients while you were running the cohort, or was this like running parallel to your existing work?
Yeah, I did not pause. It's just a reallocation of the resources. So I have like a small team and some people who will like kind of float in and out of my work as I need backup. So I only take like 1 to 2 clients on at a time. So right now for my business model, the consulting is gonna probably bring in about 80% of my income from my business in 2024. And my hope is that the community will bring in about 20%. And then over time, I can shift that ratio to and flip it to 80% coming in through the community experiences and 20% through consulting projects that, and I can get even kind of pickier with like the projects that I really love and I'm really drawn to. So that's the ultimate vision. But yeah, for the time being, we're firing on all cylinders and started the year with a lot of energy. I would say I have stepped back from it. Originally, I thought I would launch the community 3 times in a year and do 3 cohorts, and I've realized since then it's more realistic to do 2. So I definitely have to adjust my strategy once the new year settles and I don't have all of the energy of the new year with me.
Yeah, I love this, and this is perfect for this podcast because most of our listeners are also hustlers like you who have stuff that they're doing as their main thing. It can be consulting or it can be creating content of some kind, like maybe they have a big newsletter audience and they're doing community on the side. So, they don't have like a ton of resources to pour into their community and building their community experience. And since you yourself have been in this boat, you can empathize with their situation, and that can be really helpful.
Absolutely. And to be honest, like it's really common, and I fall into it too, where you think when you're used to creating content for your audience, it's really tempting to think, and especially when you look at other communities that are out there that are very content based and have a ton of content in them, it's easy to compare yourself and think, in order for this community to be valuable, I have to now produce even more like prolific amounts of content. And I kind of just leaned into the like strength of my new beginning. And I decided for the structure of my community, I structured it around these live classes and live sessions. And that's really where I taught the material. And I did that for a couple reasons. One was practically, I didn't have time to create an entire like course and like beautifully produced. I was like, I don't have time to do that before I launch, number one. Number two, I didn't want to do it that way because I was still testing the material. And when you put something into a recorded video, you don't get to see someone's like visible reaction to the content. And I really wanted for this first cohort, especially for me to be able to get that live feedback from them and hear the questions and see where there were gaps in the material and where I needed to follow up with more resources. So it was all a testing phase, but I also think those live sessions are not to be underestimated in their value for your members as well. because there's a certain connection that happens when they're learning the content at the same time in the same session. There's a connection that happens in the comments or in the breakout rooms that like is really hard to do when people are working through the content at their own pace. So I just kind of leaned into that and said, this is what it is. There's value here. And so that's like my differentiating factor. And I'm just going to make it my strength rather than worrying about making it just like everybody else's.
I love this. And I want to lean into this part where just decided to start this and not try to scale up your content first and, figure out where your 100 community members will be coming from, because that's a mistake that a lot of people do. They think that they need to become like prolific with their content before they can offer a community experience. So talk to me about the experience of launching this community without a really big audience.
Yeah, yep. I think that's another common misconception is that like if you think of like your marketing funnel, for those of you who are listening, I'm doing a V with my arms. I'll do this with my clients all the time, and it's like the most awkward thing. But I'm like, okay, so at the top you're generating awareness, you're building an audience. In the middle, you are nurturing that audience, you're nurturing the people who are in your orbit. And then at the very bottom of the funnel, you convert them to your offer. And if you have a community, that is the or one of your main offers. So when you first launch, and I tell my clients this all the time, one of our like self-sabotaging techniques is for us to look at that funnel and say like, crap, well, I haven't been focusing. I don't have this like big audience. I don't have like the top and middle part of the funnel. So there's no way that I can convert people to a community. And when you're launching that funnel, the focus on the funnel actually happens in reverse. So you need to start with, you know people, and if you are creating a community around a certain topic or identity, you are connected to, or should be at least connected to, 100 people who like know about that topic or interest or identity. So your job when you launch isn't to worry about creating this huge audience. Like you will just find yourself self-sabotaging and giving yourself like way more things that you need to do, and you'll never actually launch. Really what you need to focus on is for the people you do know and you have come into contact with, like convert them to your community, see how many of them you can get in your community, then focus on your nurturing. So now the people who you reached out to who didn't join your community, how can you keep nurturing them and providing them value until someday they do join? And then only then do we reach back out to like, okay, now how do we get in front of more people, new people who need to hear your message? But we get so caught up in like starting at the end. And I've seen so many good community ideas like not get off the ground because they think, well, first I need to like become an influencer. And then then I'll have enough people visible to my work that I can convert them.
Right. Yeah, this reminds me of this challenge that you mentioned you did when we first talked, this 100 calls, coffee chats in 100 days challenge. And that basically helped you expand your network so much that it gave you your clientele for the first year and a half of your business. And it's sort of like that. So you're leaning in with your network instead of with an audience when you're starting this.
Exactly. Yep. I don't have many tricks in the book, Nityash. I just like recycle the same one over and over again. So that one's golden. But yeah, no, that's exactly what I say. And to my clients and to my community members, I'm like, start a list of at least 40 people that you know. And it really, if you can just start there, the rest will naturally unfold. But if you start by thinking you have to do all the other things, it'll slowly crumble.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Now, okay, so for people listening, we'll have links to your community where they can sign up for the second cohort in the show notes. And you can head over there and sign up for Bri's cohort and learn from her directly. But for now, I want to do this masterclass with you and give the listeners this knowledge of how to approach community design. Because if you design your community experience right, you can just skip a lot of future headaches that you will inevitably run into if you're going with a poorly designed community. So let's start there. And can you talk to me about the different types of community experiences that one can have as a creator?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've given this a lot of thought, especially in the last like 6 months. I've kind of refined my model for this. So I'd love to actually share and set the context with a matrix I've created.
Yeah.
I'm not like an actual community strategist without my own matrix. So I've arrived. It's taken me years, but I've finally arrived. So this builds off of, I think you're also interviewing Tatiana Figueredo,
Yeah.
and she has the concept of the learning to connection ratio. So I kind of expanded on her concept of that ratio. Like any community is going to have a combination of, I just switched it to education and connection. So for those of you who can't see my screen right now, I have this matrix that shows on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have education at the top and connection at the bottom. And the limitation to this matrix is it makes those look mutually exclusive. But what's so magical about education and connection is that they're intrinsically linked. So anytime you have a communal education experience, connection is a byproduct. And anytime connection is being made, education is usually one of the main outcomes. Now, on the x-axis, we have free on the left-hand side and paid on the right-hand side. So a creator or like a creator community can technically fall in any of these quadrants. I would say usually brand communities tend to be free spaces that support, because they support a product or a service. So I'm gonna like kind of skip the free side, but maybe we can circle back if we want to dig into that. Usually the community businesses are paid. So the community itself is a product. And for the more education-centric communities, I call these transformative communities. This is where communal learning is the product. And I qualify the description of these communities. And my clarity here is that education-centric communities, I define them as there is an expert or a guide or the community manager who is facilitating a learning journey. So the key distinction for these communities is everyone comes in and there might be a couple different paths, but there is a path intended for that member. You're coming in, you're starting at point A, and the teacher, the guide is saying, all right, everybody, get in our like road trip vehicle. We are journeying together to point B. These communities are really the most common, and they're honestly, practically, their members are the most likely to adopt new technology, which I think we'll touch on in a little bit. But the reason I think they're most common is they're the easiest to explain and track ROI and impact. So you can track ROI because they're paid. It's very straightforward. You can track impact because you can say, hey, the intended journey was to go from point A to point B. How many people got to point B? It's a very straightforward, clear journey. Now, the connection-centric communities, I call these networking communities. Networking is such a like sterile term, so I'm not sold on this. Maybe this will be part of the matrix that shifts in the future, but regardless, this is where the connection between your members is the product. So these communities are spaces where education is happening, but it's because your members are connecting and saying like, oh, for example, I have a neurodivergent partner. I'd love to like meet up with a couple other people in this community who have neurodivergent partners. And I'd love to hear about like, how that impacts your life, how you like the things that you do to help like make your life better. So education is still happening, those networking communities that are connection based are really member led, and they tend to be very chaotic because I liken them to like if the transformative community is, hey, we're getting in this road trip vehicle and we're all going together. The networking community is like a bustling city of everyone is coming from somewhere different and going somewhere different, but you have these serendipitous moments of meeting and connection. And in those moments, there's amazing value that's created. So they're a little bit more for slightly OCD people like myself. It can be difficult for us to like embrace the chaotic container that a networking community requires, because it's not always clear like what the outcome is. So the impact of these communities can be pretty fuzzy. You're not sure, like connection is just kind of a fuzzy, soft, unclear, immensely valuable, but difficult to quantify. And I think it's okay that it remains that way, but we haven't quite, the business world is like kind of uncomfortable embracing them. And I understand why. I like clear outcomes. I like my I like my transformative community space. So I just wanted to start there to kind of paint the narrative, because if you are more education centric or more connection centric in your design, it's not that one is more right than the other. It's just that depending on which one you fall into, you lend yourself to certain strengths and certain challenges.
This is interesting. I really like this approach because it clearly like makes a line between the two broad experiences that one can have in their community. Now, when you mentioned earlier that with you, it's like you're leaning into the transformative communities because that's, your personality type. Should that be like, in your opinion, should that be the number one thing to look at? Or is there like a version of a community that is best served with networking instead of a transformative experience?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple factors to consider. And I do think your natural strengths as the founder or as the community builder is really important to consider. Like if you are a teacher and you really like don't like being like in front of a crowd very much, and you're like you're not that person who's like out networking, getting coffee all the time, then like, maybe not starting with a networking community, it might turn into that. There's so much fluidity between these two, so I separate them, but you have to know that it's so fuzzy, and most communities have elements of both. But what I say to my clients is the more clearly we can begin in one of these quadrants, in one of these categories, the easier it will be for people to understand what your community is. So it's more like as a starting point. But okay, so things to consider: your own personal strengths, and which honestly, like which communities you tend to join. If you tend to be more interested in transformative communities, you probably have like a better template in mind for how to navigate them and how to structure them. Other things to consider are like your marketing strategy. If you have more of like a referral based or inbound strategy, it might lend itself to transformative. If you are like really strong with your outbound strategy, or you're like crushing it on LinkedIn and growing an audience, networking communities they can be small and really powerful, but they tend to require more volume to reach that level of value. So if you're more of like an audience builder or a content creator, networking communities might be a better space. There's also like your like financial model for your business. So networking communities lend themselves really well to ongoing memberships, because again, there's not like a starting point and an ending point. So it's very ongoing, it's very fluid. People can like come in and come out at different times, but that can become a really powerful recurring revenue model for you. Transformative communities, like they don't have to be cohort based by any means. They can be an ongoing membership, but I would say more often than not, like a cohort-based community is going to probably land in transformative. So if you do better with like for myself, I'm doing 2 launches a year, like 2 big pushes to like launch my community. That's just the rhythm that my business like does better with, then maybe the transformative community is a better fit for you.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing this really good matrix, and I think this will give the listeners a better idea of how to think about their like the community that they're designing and the strategy that they should lean into.
Mhm. Mhm. Awesome.
Yeah, okay. Let's segue and talk about community platforms. This is a really saucy, meaty subject, and everybody that I've spoken to, they have different opinions about it. But I would love to get your take on it. So you're obviously a partner with Heartbeat and Circle, and you built a lot of communities using these platforms. Now, I want to ask you this question from the lens of somebody like a creator who is, as I previously said, who's strapped on resources and who is probably, like who probably doesn't have the resources to just hire their first community manager to manage a platform. So with that in mind, what platform do you suggest people should use? Like a platform like Circle or Heartbeat, which is like a community in a container sort of a thing, or something like Slack or Facebook?
Ooh, yeah, what a good question. So, okay, a couple thoughts here. So, just going back to our matrix, those networking communities, I the transformative communities are like really great for facilitating and all-in-one platforms, like hands down. Those are like amazing spaces for them. When someone is like signing up for a learning journey, there's a willingness, especially when they've paid, especially when they're like, okay, I'm joining this so that I get this outcome. They're way more willing to adopt a new technology if they haven't used that community platform before. So I would say the all-in-ones are like squarely resting with transformative communities. Networking communities, I see like struggle to make a transition to all-in-one communities because they are dependent on that connection between their members, and that is where all the value is created. They tend to at least start in more social networks. And so even though I wouldn't necessarily like Slack isn't social media, but it's certainly like a place where quote everyone already is. The the conundrum that we encounter as community builders is that as soon as quote everyone is there, no one actually wants to be there. So it's like this just vast contradiction that we all have to deal with. But I've seen a lot of like networking communities still really thrive in places like Slack. I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say I've seen them thriving in Facebook. I think Facebook is like squarely where these like free community experiences land. And I see personally the trend, I think in the same way, do you remember the ages when like it was unheard of to like pay for an app on your phone?
Yeah.
Like there was this like
Yeah.
there was this like privilege as users that we were like we just expected apps like they had to be free. And that was like probably 10 years ago. Now like I have several subscriptions for apps because I'm like, yeah, I don't want your free crappy app with like all of these ads, and like I don't want to have to like sift through endless amounts of information to find what I want. Like I'd rather pay a little bit of money to have a little bit more ease and get the information that I need more quickly. So community is going through that same transition. We're coming from the age of like free Facebook groups where you wade through just like copious amounts of crap to find the support and help and connection that you need. And maybe you make a friend and you're like, thank God I found you. And then you like leave the Facebook group and you're like, okay, we don't have to go back there. People are more and more willing to pay a small or large sum of money to be in the community that they know they're going to get value from. So all that to say, I would say like Slack for me still kind of rests in that networking. Like it can be helpful and impactful for networking communities. Financially, I don't think it's a viable plan long term for the community builders. It's expensive to scale in Slack. Ironically, I hope they like make it more accessible over time. If you're just starting out, so even before I dive into the all-in-one platforms, my recommendation is like even before you have an MVC or minimum viable community, you start with one communal experience. So even if that's just your course or just an event or like a series of events, like a smaller container that doesn't even require you to build it in an all-in-one platform to test your idea. So I'm just assuming the person that we're speaking to has maybe like tested a little bit. They've done like an event series. For that, I'd say like use Luma or something similar. You can use like Notion or Google Docs for like a library of resources. Like you can keep it so bare bones. And from like running my business, I keep my expenses like so tight. Like I am like ultra conservative when it comes to my spending. So I think there's ways to test it before you need to invest in an all-in-one platform. I would say at the point that you are introducing programs that require more than one pillar. So maybe I talked about this in our first episode. I consider there to be 3 pillars for community programs: events, conversation, and content. And content includes like learning content. When you start with just one, I don't think you need to invest in an all-in-one platform. At the point that your members are asking you for, or you are strategically choosing to expand into 2 or 3 pillars, an all-in-one platform is my preferred method of community building. It makes my life easier, which honestly is just as important as your member experience. If the task of building and managing the community is laborious, it's going to burn me out a lot faster. So my life is a lot simpler. And in my experience, my members are usually really excited to have a space where all of the content, all of the events, all of the conversation is in one place that's a dedicated home for their experience.
Absolutely. This differentiation that you made about how transformative communities fit really well in the community container platforms, that just clears everything up. Like I had so many examples in mind, but I was like, okay, but this community is really helpful and it's on Slack. And then this other community is on Circle. So I was thinking, the community, we're both part of it. And I guess everybody loves that. And that's a community on Slack. And that's a networking community because everybody in there, they're just helping each other out. And so it makes sense for them to be on Slack. And same goes with, let's say, Lenny's newsletter community. That's also on Slack. And that's also a networking community. But then I was talking with Kyle Hagi of Morning Brew Learning, and he said that he purposely chose Circle as his platform because he was like taking his members on a vacation, like a 6-week vacation, and he wanted
Oh,
that experience to not be your usual, like the daily stuff. That he wanted that to be a different experience. And
I love that. That is like, that just totally validated. Oh my God. I love that you like brought in those examples. That was perfect. Yes. Yep. That's exactly how I think about it. And especially for like, I love telling community members when they join a community in Circle or Heartbeat, like we have deliberately chosen to bring you into a space that is designed to be distraction free because this container is that important. And it really helps. Like there's some training and some onboarding involved in like helping your members adopt a new technology that is not to be underestimated, but it isn't insurmountable. And especially more and more, like it's just growing prolifically. So I host my community in Heartbeat because they have a very like events centric design to their platform. They have a lot of features that support events really robustly, and I liked that. And that's kind of my community is very event centric, so that's the design that I leaned towards. But yeah, they're both, Circle and Heartbeat are both fabulous examples.
I love that. Okay, that clears this out. Now, on to the next thing. When I am creating this community, like how should I think about the engagement strategy for both of these types of communities? So let's take them one by one. Like how should I think about engaging my community in a transformative community and then one in a networking community? And that includes like how should I be thinking about designing the space, the community space, which is the channels, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yep. So again, like these categories are so fluid, but like the more you're able to identify yourself in one, the more like kind of guidelines you'll have, and like kind of it's like those like bumpers when you're bowling. It's like, oh yeah, okay, this is like the intended route. So when you're creating a networking community, the engagement that you're looking for is engagement between your members. So all of your content should not compete with that. It should support and prompt and elevate your members connecting to each other. So your events are going to look a lot different than like expert sessions are a program that work really well. And they work really well in both communities, but expert sessions tend to be more of that transformative style where you have someone coming in who is the expert, who's going to like educate everyone. Something that would like a comparable program or event series in a networking community would be like a member show and tell. So for the community, it would be like, hey, come to this event. Everyone who is in attendance is going to get like 5 minutes to show us like their favorite feature in their community that they built. So it's much less about this like one guide, one expert showing us the path, and it's more collaborative. Now, transformative communities, usually they start with like the engagement that we're looking for is we want engagement on the material that they are going through. So they are working through learning content or live sessions or like articles, however you format it, whatever the learning journey is. The engagement you're looking for is like, are they engaging in that content? And this is like probably the biggest weakness of the transformative community is that our job as community builders is to slowly move the needle where that engagement shifts from them just engaging with us in the learning material, and it shifts towards other members. So some common like tactics to help with that strategy are to like ask or require members to provide feedback to each other on their work if they're like actively putting the work into application, sharing their work, providing feedback. Because at the end of the day, education is super valuable and it might be easier to get people to pay for it, but connection is the stickiness in your community. Like, make no mistake, your members are staying because the connection is really sticky and because they find a lot of value with the other members. So when you start with a transformative community in a very education-centric model, you do have to like be aware that you have to make those slow adjustments and like migrate them over into connection.
This is such an important point, and I want to just double click on this. So asking members to give feedback to each other and prompting them every so often, that is a great way to foster some of these connections between the members. What are some other tactics that you have employed, or maybe you've seen in one of your community dissection series that people are doing to foster these member-to-member connections in their communities?
Yeah, I actually have a great case study. Tamana runs the recovery community, which is hosted in Circle. And the recovery community they were actually a client of mine. So I helped like build that community. And it's a community for people who are overcoming disordered eating patterns or eating disorders. And so this is a very vulnerable space. And I kind of helped set up the community, architect it, structure it, and then Tammy took it over as the community manager. So she had the real job. I had the fun job, and I was like, oh, you've got the tough job of getting these people to talk to each other. So one of the things that she did, and I did like a follow-up interview with her to like see how things were going. And of course, it was really difficult in the beginning to get people to start posting about these, vulnerable updates about how their like eating journey is going and their recovery journey. And so one of the tactics she employed was she was like, okay, if I can get them talking at least to me and get them to trust me in the DMs, I can slowly draw that conversation back into the public spaces. So she was super diligent about starting like at the warmest possible place of connection with those members, which was the DM she had with them. And then what happens is like as you're having conversation with people, and I see this in my community all the time, I've like stolen her strategy. You'll find like people are asking questions and you're like, oh, that's such a good question. Actually, I'm sure other people in the community have that same question. I'm going to give you the resource, but like, would you mind posting that in this space so that other people can see my response? It's those little bridges that you can pull from your connection. The one place where you have like that warmest connection and warmest engagement, you can slowly draw the bridge into other spaces. I also see it's really simple, but like, especially when you're dealing with a new technology, and that might be one of the limiting factors. I always tell my members and my clients to create bridges into technology that they are super familiar with. So make it super easy in your weekly digest for them to get like a synopsis of where to go for what to find and what posts they should engage on in that weekly digest so that they can really easily click into the community and find the place where they can engage. That's the one thing I think Circle and Heartbeat, their pre-made digest is not super great. It'll show you like top trending posts, but it's not very customized. So I would say like take the time to customize that, because if technology is one of the obstacles that's getting in the way of your engagement, you have to go the extra mile to draw that bridge for your members.
Yeah, I agree. I love this example, and Tammy's a dear friend, so shout out
Oh,
to her,
great.
and I'll share this with her. But I love this example of, basically like this old startup adage of doing things that don't scale, and how this can apply to community building work as well.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we get so caught up in like, well, I shouldn't DM my members or like have a very like customized onboarding experience, but especially in the beginning of a community, those initial members and the connection that you as the founder have to them it's so important. And it's so important because it sets the pace and models the behavior for your future members. So it is so worth that extra little bit of effort that you will expend will save you tons of calories in the future if you can start to get your members to model the behavior that you want them to see.
Love that. Okay, so let's talk about scaling this community experiences through an ambassador program. Now, this will come in a little bit later on in a community builder's journey, but this can be really important because it allows you to basically um, scale your community, like put your community on steroids, essentially. So do you have any frameworks for thinking about an ambassador or volunteer program?
Oh yeah. So the very first community that I built was an ambassador program for a brand, and the main way that we grew that ambassador program was through ambassadors referring other ambassadors. So I'm very familiar with, the design that lends itself to a good program. There's a million ways to design a very bad referral program, and there's not just one right way to do it, but there's very fewer ways to do it well. So I'll start with what not to do. A lot of people think, and we thought this in my very first community, we were like, exclusivity, that's the thing. So like everyone can only refer to new members, and that will make them want to refer more members because we put this limit on it and it's exclusive. And we were like copying this other company that was doing that. And like 2 years later, that company went out of business. So thank God we stopped that program. I think exclusivity is like an interesting psychological, there are other ways that you can like design exclusivity into your community that are not going to shoot you in the foot, like in a referral program. So don't use exclusivity in your referral program. The people who I always come back to the 80-20 rule. So it's the Pareto principle. And basically it's this like life phenomena where 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. So this strategy, like really, it's like one of the pillars of my like community strategy in general. But if you look at in a field, 20% of the plants are producing 80% of the harvest. In your wardrobe, you will wear 20% of your wardrobe 80% of the time. So a lot of people have like taken this concept and kind of adapted it for their own industry. For the fashion industry, the like capsule wardrobe movement was basically saying, let's take, if you're only wearing 20% of your wardrobe 80% of the time, let's like scale back. You don't need that other 80%. Let's just focus in on the 20% you know and love and wear over and over again. And let's like make that really amazing and even better. So this concept applies to referrals in that when you launch your referral program, 20% of your members are going to be really stoked to share. And any referrals that come in, 80% of them will likely come from this like top 20%. So and this is how I approach like leadership and like the journey a member takes through your community in general. Don't worry so much about converting every single person into your top member. Like make that pathway easy and accessible and like support it. But really focus your time and energy on the top 20% of your community who love what you're doing, who are like stoked to share about it, and like give them everything they need to make it super easy for them to invite their friends. So that's on the like equipping side. Then there's this whole other, there's like essentially 3 parts to a referral program, which is the habit formation cycle, which is how are we prompting members? How are we supporting the action we want to see? And then how are we rewarding that action? And that's really the framework that I use for any action that a member can take. But when the action that you're hoping that they'll take is referring a new member, we have to get even more specific. So on the reward side, here are some things not to do. I don't like giving discounts because I think it influences the way that a new member behaves when they enter your community. So rather than like making it less of an investment, I would give more. So give bonus material, bonus session. I've seen referral programs and the upside is like famous for their like amazing referral program. And what works so well is that Erin offers something that you can get nowhere else, which is a private session with her. So if there is something that you can like really protect, that the only way to get this thing, it doesn't have to be huge. I always say when I'm like crafting the language for a referral program, like the spirit of this is that you're sharing because you think this space it's been really valuable to you and you want to share it with other people. So you're not doing this because I'm going to give you this like gift, but I'd love to like thank you for taking the effort to share it. So this is a thank you gift. This isn't like the reason that you're doing it, because I think that that's important to highlight the spirit of like why someone is referring. And the more like gamified it gets, sometimes what can happen in those like really gamified experiences is, yeah, you get a lot of new members, but they're not actually your ideal members. They're just kind of people filling seats, which for some communities maybe is fine. But usually for the communities that I'm working with, like we're after a very specific ideal member. And that's so important because the closer your member is to the ideal that you're looking for, the better the community experience is going to be in general.
I love this. Okay. You're so packed with frameworks. I can really understand why clients love working with you.
Yeah, I threw a lot at you in that last one.
No, this is perfect. Like this is exactly what I was, even better than what I was hoping for. So this is a really concrete way of looking at the different aspects of designing your community that people can just take it and run with it. Now, I want to talk about these community dissection videos that you've been doing. And those are really interesting because you basically invite a friend and you're dissecting a community, a popular community, and, like showcasing like how they're doing things right, how they're doing things, what can be improved, and all of that. So I'm curious, have you found anything in those dissections so interesting that you decided to steal it in your own community work?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, definitely. I have to like think back through. There's like probably like 40 episodes now.
Anyone that comes top of your mind.
Yeah, yeah. Well, honestly, like this matrix has like really put a lot of those episodes into perspective on like I think early on when I started that series, I didn't quite have the breadth of context for like just how many different types of communities there are. And I think I was a little bit narrow in my like interpretation of like what community should be and like which granted there's a lot of communities that are just like so sprawling and confusing and like lacking in clarity that I don't think anyone understands what's going on there. But now this matrix definitely gives me like deeper understanding of how they're structured. A few practical things that I have loved seeing in the dissections. We actually have a new episode coming out soon. This is so tiny, but it stands out to me. The Talk Base Friends community, that dissection is coming out in June. And it's so little, but in their intros channel in Slack, they say intros and networking. And I love that, like, one, that left sidebar real estate in your community is, I call it your oceanfront real estate to tell your members, one, if they have arrived at the right place, and two, what happens here. So to add that, like, I normally just see like introductions or intros in that, like for that channel or for that space. And I love that they added networking because it cued to me, oh, this isn't just like a one and done space. This is the place I come back to again. And if I want to network, this is where I go. Like I read through the intros, I see who has newly joined. Like this is it made the space like so much more active and alive to me. Cause I think prior to that moment, I always saw the intro space as like, this is my grand entrance and like everyone learns about me. Which is feels great. Like I love the intro space as a new member. I'm like, oh, I've got my intro on lock. I'm gonna like wow them. And I was like, oh, it's so much, it is about me introducing myself, but it's also about like who I can meet in that space. And this is like, I'm a community builder. I should know this stuff, but it was a really nice design detail that I liked.
I love that. I've never seen this in any of the communities that I've joined. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a great moment. So the HubSpot community, I would say with my like quadrant, it hits like probably, well, I guess it's not paid. Maybe they have paid programs. Probably hits all four quadrants. They like have so much going on there. It's like from customer success to product, like it hits every department. So internally to me, like what I see externally in the community, to me tells me like internally with the teams, there's like a lot of cross collaboration and clearly a lot of like the community team is really at least invited to, if not invested in lots of different departments across the company. It was also like really easy as a member or user for me to like kind of conceptually grasp like this is where I get help and this is where I can learn more and this is like, oh, if I wanted to like rise in the ranks of HubSpot experts, like this is how I would do it. And a lot of like, to contrast that with the Canva community, which was like literally just a cluster. Like they created a YouTube video that showed that like instructed you on all the different communities that you could join and like which one is for who, which I appreciate. Like at least there's some air traffic control happening where they're like, see, there's a lot of confusion. So if you're coming here, go there. If you're going there, go there. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is so confusing that you need like a YouTube video to explain it. So I think, I mean, and I like rag on Canva, but I think that they have some amazing like programs happening and like they do have some great communities. It's just like a really fractured ecosystem. And I think as brand communities go, HubSpot is like setting the pace for an amazing experience.
Love that. Okay. I've got so many questions, more questions for you, Bri, but I want to be respectful for your time and ask you just the one final question for this interview. So, is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners with? Any links or actions that you'd like them to do?
Yes, I would actually love, and we'll include this link in the show notes. I'm actively collecting anonymous stories about community conundrums, fiascos, that time that shit hit the fan in your community. So anything that has like, if you're a community manager or community builder, maybe you're just getting started building your community and like all of those like deep insecurities are rearing their ugly head. Whatever the thing is, I'm collecting anonymous stories that seek advice. This is a new project that will be launching in the fall for me, but I would love to just put it out to the audience here that if you have any story or scenario, I would love to have you submit it.
I love that. Okay, so go to the show notes and hit Bri up with your shit hitting the fan stories. All right, Bri, this has been a blast learning from you and speaking with you once again on this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your amazing frameworks with us. This was a blast learning from you.
Oh, thank you for having me. These times with you, Nityash, are so valuable for me because it like forces me to synthesize my thoughts. I always have them all over the place, but I love being your questions help guide me in such a helpful way. So thank you for interviewing me.
It's been a pleasure.